So welcome to session 3, and this is what we did in the previous session. These are the topics we covered, and in this, the third session, these are the 3 things that I should be covering. And don't forget, if you haven't already downloaded, make sure you get my ebook, and it could be some good bed night reading for you. A couple of evenings it will take you because it's a very short book, 130 odd pages. So I'm going to get onto the meaty subject of how to approach potential buyers. So in the previous session, how to identify your ideal buyer. This is about how on earth are you going to approach potential suitors for your business. And I'll put it in the plural because one buyer is no buyer. So make sure that you approach a number of prospective buyers for your business. So one golden tip is to use the phone, mail, phone strategy. So call that business that you've targeted, that you think might be quite a good or a very good fit for you as an acquirer. Find out who's responsible for the purchase and acquisition of businesses, get their contact details, and then email them. Ideally email with your proposition. Then make a follow-up call to that person, because you've got their contact details now and you can refer them to the email that you sent to them a couple of days ago. So phone, mail, phone. Don't keep sending emails that never get read. And definition of insanity, isn't it? To keep doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different outcome. So you definitely need to find who's responsible for acquisitions in that organisation. If it's a large enough business, it will have its own mergers and acquisitions division. So you want to speak to the M&A director to have a conversation with them and certainly contact them. The next thing to do is to send an anonymized teaser. So it's usually 1, sometimes 2 pages I've seen, that doesn't give away who you are, but does give enough information about the business for them to make a decision. Is this something they're interested in or not? Then they can sign a non-disclosure agreement. Then you can give them more information. But it's really important that you don't show your cards too soon. And this, if you're using an M&A advisory firm, that's a good one, a pear, not an apple. If you haven't watched my sessions in order, you'll wonder, what on earth is he talking about fruit for? Well, go back to that previous session and you'll find out why. Using a good M&A advisory firm, they won't say who their client is, but they will talk about the business in some sort of top level way, just to establish interest and relevance. Do make sure a non-disclosure agreement is signed. Is it enforceable? Well, that's a question mark. Do people get them signed all the time? Yes, it gives some degree of comfort. The next thing, once the non-disclosure agreement has been signed and come back, is to send the sales prospectus. In the industry, we call it a compelling information memoranda, an IM, plus 3 years statutory accounts. So make sure they're in order and they're ready and available for viewing. Oh, and that you know what's in that information. Don't send out information if you don't know it backwards. You do need to be very au fait with the information you're sending out. And then follow up. Once you've sent that compelling proposition, sales prospectus, the IM, couple of days, 2 or 3 days, and then contact that M&A director or the person responsible for acquisitions. It might be, if it's a smaller firm, it might be the managing director, president, CEO of that business, and have a conversation. Find out, A, are they interested? B, book a meeting. If they're not interested, why? It's always useful. It may not be that they don't like your business. It may be it's just the wrong time for them. And actually, if you contacted them 6 months, 9 months down the line, maybe a better time. Maybe they're already in an acquisition already and they haven't got the bandwidth to look at buying another business simultaneously as well. So there could be all sorts of reasons, but do make that follow-up. Don't leave it weeks, make it days. Because if they're interested in you, like any good selling strategy, you don't want the buyer going cold, and they will go cold daily. Colder and colder and colder and colder. So don't leave it weeks, expecting them to pick up the phone to you. No one has ever returned a sales call. What you want to achieve from that conversation, as I mentioned, is to book an exploratory meeting. At the moment, with COVID, it will be a Zoom meeting, but in the good old days that I'm sure will return, we'll be having face-to-face meetings in meeting rooms, preferably in a environment that's equidistant between buyer and seller. In that meeting need to be the decision makers. That sometimes is quite difficult to achieve because some decision makers hide behind people they employ to try and do a recce, to try and find out everything about the business. But you want, as the seller, you want the decision makers in the room because you're going to be selling the opportunity to the people in front of you. You want to make sure it's the people that have got the ability to make a decision. And it's something I do have to quite often remind clients who are selling their business, just have an open mind. Initially, don't pre-qualify people out, thinking, well, they wouldn't be able to afford me. Well, you don't know what access to funding they have. Or I've never liked that company in the industry. Well, great, you don't have to stick around. But try not to use your own pre-formed judgments about a business or even about an industry. I had a client who said to me they didn't want to sell to a private equity firm because they'd heard that they're all vultures. Well, there are tens of thousands of private equity firms. There aren't tens of thousands of vultures. In fact, a lot of private equity firms have aligned interests with the businesses that they purchase. In fact, after a period of a number of times, she actually sold to a private equity company. And she stayed on for 4 years because she said she wouldn't last longer than a week. Because the private equity firm that we put her in front of were a perfect fit for her. The chemistry was right as well. That's why she decided she wanted to stay on for 4 years. So do have an open mind. Don't disqualify. As long as they're not tire kickers, be open. Maybe you can't see the fit immediately because it's a complementary industry. But maybe it's worth having that 2-hour exploratory meeting to see where 1 and 1 could equal 3. You might surprise yourself. We have fun with negotiation meetings, and I have over the last 20 years. There are 6 golden rules on how to prepare before a negotiation meeting and how to conduct yourself in a negotiation meeting. What we want to avoid is being punched. So it might seem to I've had 2 situations in 20 years where the seller, my client, has got up from the table to try and punch a prospective buyer. That's not a good way to build rapport and relationship. So 6 golden rules. Role play. I know it's hackneyed and it might sound a bit cheesy. It is worth doing. And certainly is with you as shareholders, but if you're engaging an advisory firm to represent you, get them to role play with you. Get them to be the acquirer, to ask you challenging and searching questions. And you can use the 30 questions I've got in the data room. I mean, that'll be a great way to do a role play. And each of your shareholders need to rehearse the same questions. And then you decide who's going to be the main speaker. Make sure that you have all the key information readily available. And one tip I give all my clients the last 20 years, I buy them a folder. In fact, for many years, I bought them a leather-bound folder because I want them at the start of the process to start collecting in that ring binder all the documentation they're going to need in due diligence. It's almost like a DD folder so that you can lay your hands in one area, all the documents you're going to need. Now, clearly, I sound like a bit of a Luddite. Yes, I like folders and paperwork. Yes, you can put it in a data room. But I like the touch and feel of a leather-bound folder with paperwork. Actually, both work. You can have all the information repository in an electronic form, but also, if you go into a meeting, it's quite nice to have the folder with you by your elbow that you can refer to documents. But make sure you've got all the key information available, like lease agreements if the business is leasing property, staff contracts, supplier contracts. What are they? Because you'll be asked for examples. Or you could be asked questions and you'll need to refer. Make sure you've got all your accounts. Make sure you've got your management accounts. For years, I've never taken on businesses for sale unless they have management accounts. So I don't mean what's filed at Companies House. I mean the accounts that you run on a monthly basis to run the business. Because buyers will want to know where the business is today or year to date. Yes, you can look up on Companies House or you can look at statutory accounts, but that's the past. They're not buying the past, they're buying the current and they're buying the future. So they'll want to know, and they'll ask you for your future forecasts. If you haven't got them, you're going to be stumped. It's all right talking about the future is orange and the potential is there, but you've got to put some numbers around it. And you've got to talk with some confidence about it in front of someone who's looking to buy your business. This is a hard one because this is more soft issues. The words that you use are really powerful. Don't mention the R word. The R word, risk. And it's usually framed in such a way by the seller saying, well, the trouble is, or, oh dear, it's so hard. You don't want to be saying these things. It might be hard. It might be tricky. You might have failed at things. But why are you talking about it in a meeting? Because you're selling something in exchange for cash. You're selling your share certificates in exchange for cash. Would you do that with clients that you're looking to buy your services? So you want those buyers, after the 2-hour meeting, whatever it is, you want them leaving that meeting, getting back on the train or in the car, having a warm, fuzzy feeling about buying your business. That's what you want to leave them with. So choice of language and what you say is really important because that will affect how they feel about buying your business. And this is one for any salespeople. I've been in sales for 40 years. Don't answer questions that you have been asked. That's a recipe for disaster. Because if you haven't been asked a question, it probably means that the buyer isn't interested. Also, if you start answering a question you've been asked, you could be in danger of waffling. And if you say too much, you could trip yourself up. And certainly something could be in conflict with the information that you kindly provided 2 weeks beforehand in advance of the meeting. So keep to the script. I used to have a pencil. Used to, with my client, if they were talking too much, like a fellow salesperson, give them a little dig with the pencil, just that let them know that they're going on a bit too much. And they're perhaps talking about things that they shouldn't talk about at this point of the process. I've mentioned honesty. It's a very good attribute, but wisdom is the higher attribute. Definitely, I'm not saying you be dishonest with what you say. You have to be honest, but you don't have to tell them everything. In a meeting, you may not be aware of it as the seller, the buyer will be. It's the risk pendulum. What they're doing is assessing where that risk pendulum is. Is the risk all on them? Or is it all on you? Can't do it with the other one. There you go. It doesn't mean to say a good deal is 50-50. The pendulum is like that as a plumb line. It doesn't mean that. It just means wherever the risk sits, both parties are comfortable or can live with it. If you're looking for all of the money on day one, that is high risk for the buyer. You might think it's worth it. The buyer will look at it very differently. They're seeing all of the money for the business is payable on one day and you walk away. And do you know what? Some sellers don't always tell the truth. Some things they conveniently forget about. And due diligence doesn't always unearth everything. So there's risk for the buyer. So the good deal is where the risk pendulum sits comfortably between the two parties. So be aware that anything you say, anything that you do will affect risk in the mind of the buyer. I've mentioned about going out to enough people, 50 to 100. I mean, it's a range, but it's definitely not one. No buyer. One buyer is no buyer. 2 buyers is very little better. You need to be going out to 50 plus, 50 to 100. So if you're using an intermediary, make sure they're going out to a wide enough pot of potential buyers, because most of them won't be interested in sitting down with you, just statistically. It's also very important from start to finish to agree a timeline. This is particularly important when in the latter part of the process, when lawyers are involved, to make sure that you've got a completion date set. I've seen too many examples in the industry where things have just gone on, and what should take 3 months, a year later, they're still debating the finer points of a contract. Often it's because there's been no completion date agreed by both parties. That's really important. And then you need someone to keep the group accountable, all the parties accountable to that deadline. Really important. The longer a deal goes on for, I can tell you now, it's less likely to succeed. This is because of deal fatigue. People get fed up. Someone gets fed up and they pull out. A bit like, I suppose, a chain in real estate. If it goes on too long, someone's going to pull out the chain. You don't want that to happen when you're selling a business. But people do get tired. So keep people accountable, keep the time frames tight, and make sure lawyers, particularly if they're paid by the hour, are kept to account on how long things are taking. When we're talking about value or valuations of businesses, to get a premium price from a buyer, you need to unearth in that first exploratory meeting, ideally, why they're in front of you. Why do they want to buy your business? What are their motives? And it isn't all about profit. There could be all sorts of other reasons why they want to buy your business. So it's not about multiples of profit, as people will often quote to value a business. It's the motives that drive the value of a business, not multiples. Golden rule, I had one of these last week. Chap rang me. His business making about 150k on the bottom line. He's got an interested party, a much bigger business interested, which is great, very flattering. It's in the same sector, and they wouldn't give him a price. And so he fell into the trap of giving them a figure, and he gave them a figure of 1.5 million on a company making 150k. So that's a 10 times multiple, 10 times profit. Oh, and he didn't want any deferred structure. He wanted it pretty much cash on completion. So why on earth would someone pay 10 years profit on day one? I did say to him that, so you committed the cardinal sin of giving the price to the buyer as the seller. When did you do that? 3 weeks ago. I said, have they come back to you? No. So there you go. The radio silence. Of course they've not responded. They think you're nuts. Because they're going to want, you need to justify, you don't just pick a figure out of the air. So, but the golden rule is never to give a price, get the other party to make an indicative bid, because the reality is your business will be worth different amounts of money to different people, depending on who you're in front of. So invite indicative offers. Now that's easy for me to say, it's quite hard to do under the pressure of the spotlight when you're in a meeting with a buyer. So a good phrase that I've used for many, many years is to say, ask my clients to say, look, I've got no preconceived ideas about price because I've never sold a business before. If that's true, then say it. But I'm guessing it'd be worth different amounts to different companies, and that's why we've approached a number of firms just like yours where we think there's a great fit. So you're introducing competition into their mindset. So we're inviting indicative offers by such and such a date. So now you've created competitive tension and you've made it time bound. Now they've got to act, and they know that they're going to be in competition with others. You haven't given a price. You've put the ball in their court, and they're to come back to you with an indicative offer. And I've always suggested to buyers they make 2 offers on one sheet of paper. There's the offer that they're probably going to make, which has some amount payable on completion and the rest deferred over a period of time. I always invite them to make a cash on completion offer, so a clean deal. Then you've got option A, option B. When anyone that's in sales will know that's an alternative close. But now you've got 2 offers for the price of one buyer. So never ever give a price. Always get the other party to make a bid. And you do ideally want to get at least 3 offers, ideally more the better. I think the most I've been involved with is 16 offers on one company. And in fact, my client said to me, stop. I think we may have found the buyer. I just don't know which of the 16 it is. So, and funnily enough, they're all at different levels. Just shows you can't value a business on a P&L and a balance sheet. Because if you could, then all those 16 offers would be in a narrow band because they're using the same data. It isn't. The average, I've noticed over the 20 years of doing this, is over 130% difference between the lowest offer and the highest offer. 130%. And yet they've had all the same information. So generate several offers. Now you're in control of the process of negotiating your deal. And of course, the biggest competitor is to them is you not selling your business. If you've got a profitable, attractive business that's saleable, of course you could decide to decline all of those offers. Now they're competing against you doing nothing and growing. Maybe if they're in the same industry as you, being a bigger competitor to them. And lastly, don't go exclusive until you need to. And by exclusivity, I mean you sign something called a heads of terms. It's different expressions in different countries. It could be a memorandum of understanding, but it's not the contract for sale. It's like a pre-agreement where the main planks of the deal are outlined in writing. Both parties sign. It's not legally binding except for two situations. One is exclusivity and the other one is confidentiality. So you're not supposed to be telling other people, and you're not going to be courting other potential buyers for a certain period of time, typically 3 months, could be a bit longer. That's what I mean by exclusivity. Once you go exclusive with a particular buyer that you've chosen, the negotiating strength shifts away from you to a degree and goes to them. So you want to make sure that the people that you've selected have got the money, the motivation, and the likelihood that they're going to go the distance. So motives for purchase, there's a whole range of things, but you can use this as your ready reckoner checklist before you go on the market to sell your business. What's the buyer going to be looking for? Well, the most common one is they want your client base, because that's where they can cross-sell and upsell. And if they've got their own CRM and client base and it's a complementary fit, then they could be cross-selling and upselling on two CRMs and client bases. So client base, definitely. Growth potential, but what does that mean? Well, could mean geographic expansion. Perhaps it's someone that does what you do, but in another part of the country. So buying your company gives them access to a market they would find very difficult to enter. Or it might be geographic in terms of another country. It might be they're interested in the products and services that you provide. Maybe you spend a lot of money and time and energy developing your products and services. Well, if I'm the buyer, I might be interested, rather than doing that myself, I might be interested in buying your business. Now I've got those products. Mentioned about intellectual property. It isn't cheap to take out patents, particularly if you're going over a number of states, a number of areas. But it's worth its weight in gold when you come to sell your business because of this up to 20 year stay out period. Often people don't protect their intellectual property because they say it's too expensive, which I understand from a P&L perspective, but when you come to sell your business, you could reap the dividends many times over by having proper protection. If you want to start off in a modest way, how about a trademark? How about you've got a really good company name and a strapline? Well, why don't you protect that? That's inexpensive compared to a patent. So definitely take advice. Yes, definitely if you add two businesses, merge two businesses, 1 and 1 could equal 3 or 4 or 5. Yes, there are cost savings, and people talk about the cost savings. You know, you don't need 2 FDs, for example. Sorry about FDs out there. Don't need 2 FDs, only need 1 FD when the two companies are combined. It's not so much the cost savings on merger, it's actually the selling opportunities that I've touched on a few times that creates the greatest growth. And so definitely any buyer is going to be sitting there thinking, if we bought this business, what could we do with it, and what would it cost us, and what are the potential rewards for us in terms of growing turnover and profit. Sometimes, particularly in skilled areas like pharmaceutical, it might be your workforce that they're interested. They have to buy your company to buy your workforce. So it might be particular skills that are a scarcity in your industry. Well, buying your business will give them access to those skills from your workforce. It could be that they're a competitor and they want to buy you because they don't want you getting bigger. They want to get bigger and they want to dominate the market. Or it could be They want to buy your business because they don't want anyone else buying you in order to compete with them. So when you're having an exploratory meeting with potential suitors, potential buyers, try to find out what are their motives for buying you. It isn't a job interview. They're not interviewing you for a job, buying your business. You are equally entitled to ask a load of questions coming back the other way. You want to know why are they interested in acquiring, specifically, not the generic responses that people can give. Lastly, I didn't mention it, but they might be buying you for profit. Funnily enough. In fact, there's 8 motives for purchase above profit. Profit is usually in there, but it's not necessarily the top one. So you need to find out why that buyer is interested in you, and it might be several of those things that they're interested in, or all of them. I talk a lot with business owners about competitive tension. The problem with only speaking with one potential buyer who's contacted you out of the blue, this is how it happens. You get a phone call from someone, they usually flatter you, say, what an impressive business you've got, and I've been following you for a while. Would you consider selling? That's a trap. Of course, you can say, well, yes, at the right price. That's the answer. At the right price, anything's for sale. That is a recipe for disaster because it's one-on-one. And I've said a couple of times before already in previous videos, one buyer is no buyer. Trust me. You don't know whether they're going to make the best offer because you're only going to one company. How do you know? Have you got a yardstick as to whether their indicative offer is good, bad, or indifferent? You don't know because you haven't gone out to other people. So it's essential. If you want to get a top price, remember the title of this series is Selling a Business for a Premium Price. If you want a premium price, you've got to introduce competitive tension. That means more than one. There you go. I might have said it a few times now. Maybe the message will get across. I hope it will. I mentioned the difference between highest and lowest offer. If the first offer you don't know, it's unlikely that other offers will be in the same ballpark. So it's incumbent on you as the seller to unearth other potential buyers. And I have found that the person who makes the lowest offer sometimes can be the winning bid. And to be the winning bid, they have to double or treble their original offer. They have to get real. They're just chancing it. They're seeing if they can get you cheaply. And why wouldn't they? But you need to stick to your guns and stick to the principles that I'm showing in these videos. Competitive tension you have to have in a sale process. Don't think the one company that's approached you out of the blue has got your best interest. They haven't. And in fact, they don't want you to go to market. I'm telling you now, they don't want you to go to market because they want an off-market opportunity to buy you. And they want an off-market opportunity to buy you, guess what? Not to pay you a top dollar. They want to get you cheaply. That's why they want it off-market. So don't fall into that trap. You will be leaving money on the table. So these are the 3 questions. You're getting the pattern of this now if you've been through the other 2 videos. What are your learnings? What are you going to implement and when? And how are you going to keep yourself accountable for those actions that you're going to take? Using that form that you can see right there. You can see how it's building. End of session 3.